I rise today to support an alternative plan to educate our kids in Michigan. This plan balances the needs of our kids today while ensuring we maintain financial sustainability in the future. The highlights of this plan are as follows. A K-12 foundation allowance of $9,608 per student, which is a 5% annual increase and in line with the governor's recommendation. Special education funding fully phases in the 2-year foundation plus reimbursement model that I spearheaded last year. This initiative adds hundreds of millions of dollars annually to our chronically underfunded special education system. The governor's proposal fell short of meeting this stated 2-year phase-in, but I'm very grateful to my Senate counterparts who included it in their proposal. A record deposit into the teachers' pension system of $2 billion, which will not only save money over the long run that can be used in classrooms, but also ensures our teachers receive the benefit they were promised. For school safety, $286 million is distributed on a per-pupil basis to continue helping public and non-public schools secure their buildings. In addition, we would double ongoing funding for school resource officers to $50 million, a line item of funding that Democrats have eliminated in their proposals. The funding we provided in last year's budget for school resource officers is working as well as can be imagined. Administrators and parents want to see it continued. My proposal would also add some flexibility so districts can hire their own employees to serve as school resource officers. And I hope we can get behind this common sense and effective method of keeping our kids safe. For early education, this plan builds on the momentum of recent improvements to our Great Start Readiness program. This plan raises funding to $14,000 per child, helping providers hire staff and expand capacity. The governor's universal preschool plan is misleading and unworkable and has no real plan behind it. If implemented, poor kids and rich kids would end up competing for a limited number of seats. To catch up on lost learning for missing valuable classroom time during the pandemic, this plan provides $300 million focused on getting kids more instructional time through flexible options such as tutoring, after-school learning, summer school, and expanded calendars. For mental health support, this plan has $150 million to continue the important effort to improve school-based mental health initiatives, funding it on a per-pupil basis. To help fill our teacher shortages, this plan continues the Grow Your Own program with a $100 million investment. This program has been widely accepted and supported throughout our state and will help non-certified K-12 personnel become teachers. This program was an example of bipartisanship in budget negotiations last year, and I have been disappointed to not see it in this year's proposals. For career and technical education, this plan has $15 million for equipment upgrades at our schools, $10 million to recruit and retain CTE teachers, and $5 million to incentivize school districts to expand CTE offerings. This plan recognizes the recent recommendations from the School Finance Research Collaborative and the Department of Education and funds transportation costs. It costs more to bus students in some districts than others. Our plan reflects that reality by providing $50 million to reimburse schools for transportation costs based on population density. For cyber schools, this plan says no to the Democrats' plan of shortchanging thousands of students who take online classes. On top of that, this plan, it's important to note what this plan does not fund. We do not fund $2.4 billion, and we leave that funding on the balance sheet for a rainy day. Spending the entire school aid surplus now would put school finances in a dangerous position moving forward, especially as we continued with economic uncertainty. It's worth noting one non-monetary line item in this budget that Democrats removed. It is a provision that school districts have a policy prohibiting abortion referrals to our kids. If this Democrat proposal gets enacted, our kids could be connected to an abortion provider without the knowledge of their parents. It is a highly troubling change, and I hope we can reinstate the language to ensure parents know what's going on with their kids. Overall, this alternative budget I propose is balanced and sustainable. I encourage my colleagues to support this substitute. Thank you, Mr. President. I would hope we could all agree that expanding preschool opportunities in Michigan would help more kids prepare for a lifetime of learning and achievement. The question is, how do we best accomplish that in the next state budget? This amendment provides the best alternative. I have worked with many of you and the governor over the last 2 budget cycles to improve our Great Start Readiness program. We have taken significant steps to fix a broken funding model and get more 4-year-olds into the program. It's time for the next step. My plan would increase funding for Great Start to $14,000 per child, up from $9,150. This additional $190 million investment would allow the program to expand to 5 days a week, just like the K-12 model. It would also create a framework to add students to the Great Start Readiness program. Programs will be able to hire more teachers and staff. We know that this is a problem, and this amendment would help address it. Programs would be able to add physical classroom space if needed. I appreciate the Democrat proposals for preschool expansions as well, but these proposals have serious flaws. The governor's wish for universal preschool may sound nice, but it is unrealistic and unworkable. It is largely based on phasing out the income thresholds used to determine eligibility to the Great Start program. That would make more kids technically eligible to participate, but it would not create room for them in the program. There is not nearly enough resources available or proposed to hire additional teachers, find classroom space, or take other steps needed to make universal public preschool a reality. It doesn't solve a problem, it creates one. Without the necessary infrastructure to offer free public school to everyone, low-income kids would compete for spots with wealthy kids. The plan put forward by Democrats in this bill is better than the governor's plan, but it remains flawed. Instead of staying with the Great Start program, which has been in place for years, a new avenue is created within this budget proposal that could be used by districts to fund preschool. This parallel program leaves out a large number of districts that use community-based organizations to operate preschool programs. It creates a duplicative program run by districts. It attempts to fix a government-run program by creating another government-run program, and that rarely is a good idea. This amendment provides the best option to expand public preschool for those who really need it, and I ask for your support. I'm offering an amendment related to the Student Teacher Stipend Program included within Senate Bill 173. This is a good initiative, and I'm glad to see it continued. We have an opportunity to make this program even better. We can do more to get people involved in the teaching pipeline and address the worsening teacher shortage across our state. Under the current program, $9,600 is provided to future educators who are participating in their required student teaching profession. It helps these student teachers stay afloat financially while finishing up their work to become certified. However, this stipend is only available for student teachers who are working in public schools. This amendment would allow student teachers who are assigned to non-public schools to receive the stipend as well. This is an issue of fairness for student teachers. Let's say 2 aspiring teachers are classmates at the same university. One gets a student teacher assignment at a public school, while the other gets assigned to a non-public school. Why should only the one headed to a public school receive the stipend while they are working through and soon to graduate from the same program at the same college? This change would also help non-public schools that rely heavily on their student teachers to become full-time permanent teachers upon certification. If you look throughout our state, public and non-public schools in our communities are not adversaries, but rather they quite often work together. There is no reason to create this type of divide between these two systems. It benefits everyone if student teachers in this program are treated equally. In many instances, today's private school students and teachers are tomorrow's public school students and teachers. Thank you, and I ask for support on this amendment. I am offering an amendment to Senate Bill 173 again that relates to the Future Educator Scholarship, a scholarship program for college students preparing to become teachers. This program is extremely important. It is an extremely important way to address the teacher shortage in schools across Michigan. This program provides up to $10,000 for tuition and fees at participating colleges and universities. It makes college much more affordable. Some students who want to be teachers would not be able to go to college without it. Students who receive the scholarship must pledge to teach in Michigan for 3 to 5 years, depending on how many years they receive the scholarship while in college. They can teach in a public or a non-public school under current state law. Inexplicably, the bill before us today would force recipients of these scholarships to teach only at public schools. They would no longer be able to teach at non-public schools, or they might have to pay back the scholarships if they do. This is a ridiculous changing of rules, and it could force some young teachers out of the profession just as they're getting started. This amendment I propose is very simple. It keeps the requirements in this program exactly as they are now. It would allow recipients of this scholarship to fulfill their commitment by teaching in non-public schools if that is their preference. Some of these young teachers already have plans in place. They were under the impression they would be able to fulfill their commitments of the scholarship at any Michigan school. Don't pull the rug out from under them now. I urge a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. One of the greatest paradoxes I have discovered in Lansing is that Democrats love government pensions and hate paying for them, and Republicans hate government pensions and love paying for them, at least the debt associated with them. I have tried at great lengths to understand the perspective of Democrats on the issue, but I cannot accept the notion that it is good or fair to force our children to pay for a promise made by a previous generation. But as the Democrats have already pointed out recently, I am old-fashioned. In my day, we called an unjustified confiscation of another's wealth stealing. But in this day and age, I guess some feel stealing is not necessarily wrong. There was that time on Mount Sinai, somebody revealed to somebody 10 rules of living which mentioned stealing was wrong, but that was a long time ago, and I guess those ideas are old now. That all being said, this amendment would add $2 billion into our teachers' underfunded pension system. Last year, our bipartisan budget had a $1 billion deposit, and there's no reason to not double this deposit this year. This deposit will both ensure we save money over the long run, which will result in more resources being available for our classrooms. It will also shore up our pension fund to help ensure we can keep our promises to our retired educators. It is worth noting that this plan differs from the Democrats' plan that puts money into a reserve account for the pension fund instead of making the deposit. This is like putting money to pay down a mortgage into a savings account rather than actually paying down the debt. The money can still be diverted later on for other purposes. It is better to just make the deposit and not tempt oneself to divert it later on. And lastly, it's worth noting that paying down debt for the school system as a whole is substantially more prudent than the Democratic proposal to pay off student loan debt. Paying off certain individuals' college debt is unfair to the teachers who paid off their debt years ago, are still paying off their debt, or never took debt in the first place. In fact, increasing someone's wages because they took out student loans is directly incentivizing indebtedness. Paying down debt for our school system as a whole is a better benefit for everybody in the system and a better way forward. I encourage a yes vote. Thank you, Mr. President. My amendment will merely eliminate the growth of new government bureaucrats called for in this budget. The rate of government growth in this and many other budgets we have seen presented on the floor is simply unsustainable as we watch our budget surplus get depleted and the state head into a slowed economy. More Lansing bureaucrats is not a long-term solution for anything and only further burdens our already struggling taxpayers. I ask for your support of this amendment. This amendment would reduce the additional contingency funds allocated in this budget to the current year level. Pouring extra dollars into these unconstrained funds strips the legislature of its proper oversight responsibilities. It is not transparent, and it excuses the department from serious fiscal accountability. The people of Michigan deserve transparency and accountability when their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent. We were elected to be good stewards of this money. Let's not shirk our duty by surrendering legislative budgetary oversight. I ask for a yes vote on my amendment. This is supposed to be Teacher Appreciation Week. I am voting against this budget primarily because of a toolkit development line item that I feel disrespects teachers, specifically by calling into question their ability to teach history. The language for this program in the bill states, from the funds appropriated in Part 1 for toolkit development, the department is authorized to hire one limited-term employee to cover necessary costs to develop a toolkit to provide professional development regarding the teaching of full and complex American history across subject areas, including the history of communities of color and other marginalized communities. There is no question that our nation's history is full of sins committed against communities of color. This history should be taught, and we should learn from it. I love and support history. I like it so much that I picked up a major in history while studying political science at the University of Michigan. I firmly believe we should understand and learn from our history. Understanding from our past mistakes and successes can help us to become better people and improve society. But it appears to me that by including this line item, Democrats are questioning how history is currently being taught. Are Democrats saying that our teacher prep programs are glossing over this past and not properly discussing the pain our nation endured and the struggles it went through? Are Democrats saying that our teachers are not teaching this correctly? Our schools should teach history, including history that shows our nation at its worst, and how we've reckoned with those failures, and how we've grown from them. But I'm worried this inadequately defined proposal potentially opens the door to going beyond history and straying into a politically motivated agenda. Thank you. One of government's most important functions is public safety, but here in Michigan, our state has 4,000 fewer law enforcement officers on the job than we did in 2001. Many fire departments and other first responders in the state are also struggling with staffing shortages. We must reverse this trend, and that's why I offer an amendment to Senate Bill 189. This plan would significantly add to revenue sharing resources dedicated to cities, villages, townships, and counties, and it would dedicate a significant portion of that revenue to public safety initiatives. Now, I disagree with our governor quite often. That's not going to shock anyone. But I did like her budget recommendation related to revenue sharing specifically tied to public safety. This amendment would build on that proposal and add some accountability measures. This amendment, with this amendment, overall statutory revenue sharing to local municipalities would increase by 20%. Half of that increase would be ongoing and half would be one-time. Now, half of this overall increase would go specifically to public safety initiatives. It could go to recruitment, retention, equipment, training, day-to-day operations, and more. And again, half of that increase would be ongoing and half would be one-time. The amendment also takes steps to make sure that more money is truly spent on public safety. Local municipalities cannot use revenue sharing to increase, or use this revenue sharing increase to replace money that they're already spending on public safety. They must maintain public safety initiatives at current levels at a minimum. You know, if your house is on fire, or you want firefighters as fast as possible. If your home is broken into, you want to know the police are on their way. This amendment will help enhance public safety and peace of mind across our state. I ask for your support. Thank you, Mr. President. This budget contains significant increases to contingency fund authorizations for several state departments, including the Department of Civil Rights, Department of State, DTMB, and Treasury. These contingency increases further erode the body's legislative and appropriation oversight over how taxpayer dollars are spent. This amendment restores the current year thresholds for these current contingency authorizations to help ensure transparency, oversight, accountability of spending from the entire membership of the legislature, not just select committee members who deal with spending transfer requests. Please approve this amendment so taxpayers will have more representation on how their money is spent and how state government operates. In last year's budget, there was $750 million appropriated to shore up local, county, city, village, township, and road commission pension systems to a minimum 60% funding level. They could receive these funds only after they attested to certain best practices being adopted in their pension system to help make sure they avoid getting in the same underfunded problem years from now. The latest estimates I have heard is there's about $150 million of these funds that were not allocated. This amendment would take those unexpended funds and direct them toward the municipalities that are greater than 60% funding. While I agree it was prudent to take our historic budget surplus and direct it to one-time initiatives like shoring up our broken pensions to a minimum of 60% funding, there was a clear issue of fairness. It was not fair for those municipalities that did the right things for years and properly funded their pensions to not receive any funding. This amendment would allow them to use these unexpended funds to pay down debt in a number of ways, as long as they attest to best practices. I encourage a yes vote. I am offering an amendment to Senate Bill 189 to help ensure proper monitoring of corporate welfare giveaways that this legislature has recklessly approved in recent months. This amendment would retain the provision now in our state budget related to business incentive studies that Democrats want to delete. Not only would we retain this safeguard, we would add new ones. Specifically, this amendment would help ensure an independent review of the Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund projects. This builds upon a law I sponsored in 2018 called the Economic Development Initiative Evaluation Act. Sorry, let me say it again. Economic Development Incentive Evaluation Act. The reasoning is simple. If Michigan is going to give away billions of dollars in business tax breaks, shouldn't we know whether or not that it's worth the cost to taxpayers? The goal is to determine which incentive programs are worth the cost and which ones aren't, so we can focus on the ones that work and get rid of the ones that don't. This amendment provides resources to add SOAR projects to these evaluations. This legislature has approved astronomical SOAR giveaways without any clue as to whether they will be worth the cost. In Marshall alone, the state is approving at least $1.7 billion in tax incentives, a cost to taxpayers of more than $680,000 per job at the proposed factory. I have voted against this project in part because it's highly unlikely that taxpayers will ever see a positive return on investment. The least we can do is make sure SOAR projects are independently monitored so we can have quality information when we make future decisions. This is an amendment that should have bipartisan support no matter how you voted on SOAR projects. If you really think it's worth the investment, you should support an evaluation to find out. Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment would restore some desperately needed accountability and oversight to the Secretary of State budget. I can't imagine why some of these protections were stripped from the proposal before us today. This amendment gives us a chance to restore these protections and properly monitor the department on behalf of Michigan taxpayers. First, it would restore language requiring Secretary of State branches to provide adequate in-person services. Face-to-face customer service should always be part of a department's offerings, even as our world becomes more online-oriented. Not everyone is tech-savvy. Not everyone has the ability to do things online. In-person services must always be part of the equation. This amendment also would maintain requirements that certain information be reported to the legislature, including the amounts of gifts, contributions, and donations and grants received by the department, plans to send election-related mass mailings to voters before the mailings are sent to voters, information related to how well elections are running, such as the number of corrections made to the voter registration records and how many improper votes are cast in elections, progress reports on the modernizing the state's automated election system and the MERT software system that tracks and reports campaign finance information, reimbursements made to counties, cities, and townships from the department's election security grant program. This amendment also makes sure taxpayer money is spent the way it is supposed to be spent. For example, it restores the requirement that money allocated for the county clerk education and training is used only for that purpose and not diverted to some other purpose. Please support this amendment that restores some basic common sense oversight in how the Department of State operates. Thank you. And this is my no vote explanation. First, I want to acknowledge the work that has gone into this budget so far. I know from personal experience it is not easy, but I also know from personal experience that budgets absolutely can be crafted in ways that will win bipartisan support. Unfortunately, at least when it comes to my own vote today, this proposal is falling short of the mark. I have proposed some important improvements to this bill in weeks past at both the subcommittee and full committee level, and I added some more amendments today, as did my colleagues. We have an opportunity to dramatically increase revenue sharing and significantly improve public safety in our communities across Michigan while doing so. This proposal falls short. We have an opportunity to continue the progress we have made in addressing our pension debt and municipal retirement systems across our state. While I acknowledge efforts in that direction with this budget, it doesn't go far enough. Along those same lines, this budget removes the disclosure of information related to legacy costs within state departments. I find it ironic that while there are proposals to reopen the pension systems to certain state employees, this proposal also removes language exposing the hundreds of millions of dollars we pay annually into our broken pension systems. It also strips out important reporting requirements for the Secretary of State and other departments. These changes make it more difficult for the legislature to monitor state spending on behalf of taxpayers. That is a fundamental step in absolutely the wrong direction. Taxpayers deserve more money and more of their voice on how their money is spent, not less. By eliminating certain reporting requirements from state departments to the legislature, the people of Michigan would have weaker representation and a weaker voice in how their tax dollars are spent. We all know the process of putting together a budget is not over. In the weeks ahead, I am hopeful that some common sense changes that Republicans here have proposed will be incorporated in the final plan. Thank you. So this amendment would reinstate the budget language reinforcing that taxpayer dollars cannot be used to fund abortions in Michigan. Our law on this matter is pretty clear. Michigan voters banned the use of Medicaid funding for abortions in 1988. Proposal 3, approved by voters last year, did not change any of this. This law remains in force, and this amendment simply reflects that, and it is especially important for departments to understand this. I ask for my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. So today I'm offering an alternative plan to fund Michigan's public universities. It is more sustainable and a long-term plan as many universities deal with enrollment declines and changing demographics in our state. The highlights of the plan are as follows. Ongoing funding for universities would shift back to the general fund and away from the state school aid fund. A 2% ongoing operations increase for universities. In addition, universities would realize the equivalent of an increased operations funding because the plan provides more money to pay off debt. There's a total of $500 million included to pay off debt in ways that would benefit all Michigan public universities, including those who are part of the MIPSR system and those who are not. So we started paying off MIPSR's debt, pension liability debt, over the last 2 years, and this budget, this proposal would get us to the finish line. And this saves universities millions of dollars annually. This plan continues the transition toward a fair funding model that closes the gap between universities. It raises the funding floor for universities that historically have been underfunded compared to others. This plan provides $150 million specifically to make campuses safer and more secure. $500,000 would go to the Pregnancy and Parenting Student Services Program. This funding would help women who want to have families and continue their education at the same time. This plan provides $5 million for ethical stem cell and fetal tissue research while prohibiting research on aborted fetal tissue. This plan also has several accountability measures. This includes a requirement that universities report how much money they receive from foreign entities, the nature of those contracts, and how much money is being spent. It caps how much money can be spent on DEI programs and maintains current law on vaccine mandate policies. This is a sustainable budget that emphasizes campus safety, sustainability, accountability, and many other important initiatives. There are substantial headwinds in higher education. Of our 15 public universities, some have seen dramatic enrollment declines over the last 10 years. As our demographics shift, this problem will not be going away anytime soon. We should be making our universities more solvent, which will help de-risk their financial liabilities. This will enable our universities to survive over the long term, and I ask for your support. Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment keeps in place financial penalties for universities that do not keep tuition below a capped increase. This penalty impacts a university's ability to access capital outlay funding if they exceed the cap. In this era of high inflation, it is critical we ensure that tuition is not raised to excessive levels at our public universities. It would be one thing to remove this language if the state were not raising the appropriation for operations funding, which is not the case. Public universities are slated to get healthy increases, so it is important for us to ensure students are the beneficiaries of this increased spending. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment provides $5 million as a grant to universities for ethical stem cell research. There are many ways to ethically use stem cells for medical research, to include cord blood and adult stem cells. Unfortunately, we see now that the body parts of aborted children have been used by the abortion industry to commodify the human person. This amendment would require research universities that receive this grant to attest that they will not conduct research on aborted fetal tissue. This grant also allocates funding to continue a perinatology research program in Detroit. I urge a yes vote on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. The Pregnant and Parenting Student Services Program was signed into law on December 29, 2004 by Democrat Governor Granholm. Governor Whitmer also voted in favor of this program while serving in the legislature. This program provides grants to universities to connect women with prenatal care, adoption agencies, child care, family housing, financial assistance, and health care. I am not sure, but I can only surmise that this program continues to not receive funding because it does not provide for abortion referrals. This program will help give women a choice to finish a degree and raise a child. This amendment is actually very personal and important to me because I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and when I was very small, probably 2 to 4 years old, my mom decided she was going to go back to Michigan State and she was going to finish her degree. She was close to getting to the finish line, and she needed to finish a handful of more classes to finally earn that bachelor's degree. I spent a lot of time going to family and friends throughout the week. I was pretty small, I didn't really know what was going on, but I just went to go play with some friends. But one of my earliest memories that I have was actually going to a bookstore in East Lansing. My mom actually couldn't find someone to watch me that day, so I was probably, as a 3-year-old, one of Michigan State's earliest students, youngest students. So I remember going to that bookstore, picking out a Land Before Time coloring book, and I remember sitting in class and I guess coloring some dinosaurs in Michigan State University. So, this should not be political. This is just about helping moms finish their college degrees. This should be very easy to do. It's something I've lived through, something my mom's lived through, and there's no reason to try to deny someone to support life and get a degree. So I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and thank you, Mr. President. Earlier this year, there was an article published by the National Review showing that the University of Michigan spends roughly $18 million a year on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This funding employs 142 staff members. 17 staff members received a salary of more than $200,000, and the highest salary was $380,000. This funding would be enough to pay for 1,075 in-state students. To say the least, this spending is extravagant. This amendment caps spending on DEI at 2% of the university's operations funding. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President. The Michigan Constitution allows for school aid dollars to be spent on higher education. While this is permissible, this was not done as a matter of practice until a decade or so ago. We are no longer in the budget crunch we faced then. We have more than enough money, and there is no reason why we do not make this fund swap. Using school aid dollars for higher education has been decried by many on both sides of the aisle for years, and I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. For the past few weeks, I have been proposing an alternative plan to fund higher education in Michigan. This alternative plan is better than the one before us today, and I'm hopeful we can include more of its key elements before the legislature finalizes the next state budget in the coming weeks. When it comes to the proposal before us today, the budget should be more sustainable and do more to reflect the changing demographics that are affecting the declining enrollment we're seeing in Michigan. Simply put, this budget does not do enough to put universities that are losing students in a solid financial position moving forward. We should pay off more debt in our university systems. It's not complicated. If you pay off debt, it is the equivalent of an operations funding increase. Universities would have more money to spend toward other purposes. For example, our pension debt payment of $300 million last year is saving Central Michigan $9 million and Western Michigan $8 million on an annual basis. We should do more to shift university funding back to the general fund and away from the school aid fund. We absolutely should do more to improve campus safety with specific line items dedicated to making buildings more secure, especially given the tragedies that have unfolded in our state. I cannot believe how little this budget proposal does to keep our students safe. We should do more to support parents who want to go to college and raise a family at the same time. I am also concerned that this budget does not do enough to keep tuition in check and does not have strong enough accountability measures. I will be a no vote because we can do better than this. Thank you, Mr. President. Community colleges continue to fulfill important roles across the state of Michigan. I am offering an alternative state budget plan that will help them accomplish their mission in a sustainable and affordable way. The highlights of this plan include a 4% increase for operations funding, $620 million in ongoing funding to offset local millage operating revenue and reduce reliance on local community college districts. This would allow community colleges to have one tuition rate for students regardless of where they live. It would make college more affordable for students who do not live within a community college district and would lead to lower property taxes within districts. This plan includes $100 million to continue helping community colleges pay off debt. This frees up resources for other purposes and also improves long-term financial outlooks. $50 million would be provided to help community colleges make their campuses safer for students, faculty, and staff. There's $500,000 for the Pregnancy and Parenting Student Services Program, and our plan would also continue the Michigan Reconnect program, but it would not lower the age requirement for that program. So thank you, and I urge a yes vote. This amendment keeps in place financial penalties for community colleges that do not keep tuition below a capped increase. This penalty impacts the community college's ability to access capital outlay funding if they exceed the cap. It is imperative that the state's increased funding toward community colleges benefits the students. This is critical, especially in this era of high inflation. This amendment builds on an initiative presented by the governor and supported by Senate Democrats. They provided $58.7 million of funding for item funding, which supports investments in infrastructure, technology, deferred maintenance, and other related equipment. This funding will help community colleges address liabilities before they get worse. My amendment increases the funding to $100 million, and it also adds debt as an eligible use and requires 50% of the funding to be used for this purpose. It also prioritizes the paying down of pension debt, which is a growing liability for our community colleges. Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment mirrors the language that was supported in the higher education budget in the full appropriations committee. It simply allows for debt to be an allowable use of item funding. All this does is provide flexibility for community colleges to pay down their liabilities. Thank you, Mr. President.